afternoon, everybody. I hope that you can see my screen. Can you see the slide that says good talk?
Yeah.
Yeah? Can you see me? It doesn't matter as much, but I did put on earrings for this. Okay, Stuart can't. Sorry, man, you're gonna miss out on the earrings. You're gonna bobble while I talk. All right, so good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you today, talking about one of my favorite things, talking. My name is Jessie, and I'm the manager of Member Library Services at Northern Lights Library System, and I come before you today a student in the art of communication. For many years, how and why and when we communicate with others has been a subject of great interest to me because I'm an awkward person and I need to do that better. But I'm really pleased to get to share with you some of the things I've learned on my educational journey. So we're going to have four main topics that we discuss today. First, don't get lost in stories. Second, know what you want, what you really, really want. Next, clear as kind, how to be candid without being a jerk. And finally, confrontation, finding shared meaning and achieving desired outcomes. And then throughout all, you'll have a chance to ask questions. I'm going to take a little pause at the end of each section. So if you can wait until I kind of announce that I'm pausing to ask questions, that would help with the flow of this thing, just because I might answer your question in the next sentence or two. But otherwise, do feel free to ask questions. And if there's anything in this talk that you want more information on afterwards, I'm very happy to direct you to my source educational materials. So we can do that. All right. So getting started, don't get lost in your stories. This is the very first thing. How to listen to what is being said and to hear it. I don't want you to get caught up in your interpretation when you're in the thick of it. You need to practice sticking to the facts. Your feelings matter, but we're going to talk about feelings later. Ultimately, none of us are what one might consider reliable narrators in a high-stress situation. When faced with adversity, one of the first things that most of us do is try to understand why it happened and what it meant. He did this because he felt this, and that means he doesn't respect me. Now, of the three things I just said, one of them might be true, but the rest is pure fabrication based on whatever hell concoction my body and mind are stirring up this week. So you can't trust it. In a stressful situation, none of us are at our best. And in fact, we revert to being something that is referred to as a lizard brain, in which logic and moderation go right out the window. Our interpretation is often extreme, and our responses follow suit. And it's no good. So it's important in these situations to give your lizard brain some space. Before you engage, take stock of the facts. Someone else might tell you to make a 2-column list of facts and stories, but I'm just going to suggest you make one list. What are the facts? Beyond facts, you are guessing, and you can't be a reliable narrator of somebody else's story. And then once you've got the facts, you go get that story. But before you go, consider this. Why would a reasonable, rational human being do what you believe this person has done? Most of us are reasonable and rational on our good days, and not all out maniacs on our less good days. We're basically all just doing our best. So to help yourself prepare to talk about it, to de-escalate your own feelings, try to put yourself in the other person's shoes. What do you know about their situation? What do you know about their current priorities? What do you know about them? Can you conjure up some empathy for this person before you approach them to discuss what needs to be discussed? Let's be honest, you could probably fill more than a bucket with what you don't know about the situation. So take a minute and cool your jets. The key to success right now is to slow down and take stock. Before we move on, I want to offer a piece of caution. In every fairy tale, there's a victim and a villain. And every single one of us is the main character in our own story. And that means that in some cases, when the situation calls for storytelling, we might see ourselves as a victim to lesser or greater extents. But almost nobody wakes up planning to be the villain in somebody else's story. This isn't Despicable Me. So this is another way that you can prevent yourself from getting caught in an unhealthy thought pattern that's going to escalate a situation rather than help you achieve understanding. Now, it'll help you a bit to know more about what it means to adopt or assign the victim and villain roles. These roles are unfair caricatures and they shape how we move through the world. So victims are victims because of the bad motives of others or the adverse situations that they find themselves in through no fault of their own. They're helpless and they adopt a mentality of there was nothing I could do. It wasn't my fault. They're powerless to do anything healthy or helpful, and their options are severely limited. Cue the lizard brain. So how do you resist a victim role? You think of yourself as the protagonist, the hero of the story. You are the agent whose actions and choices are going to make the biggest difference. So when you know what you want, the next step is deciding what actions your main character, you, are going to take to get there. My team has talked about this mentality a lot over the last year in our 100% accountability framework. What outcome do we want to achieve? What are we going to do to achieve it? And I will tell you, it makes a world of difference. For more on this line of thought, you should definitely plan to attend our final speaker session of the year, Leading from Any Position. That's on November 29th. So next, we have the villain. Villain is a convenient label, and it places all the blame and all of the responsibility on one thing or one role. They become the focal point of all of your frustrations, and it's very easy to slip into insulting or even abusive behavior. After all, they deserve it. They're the bad guy here. And this has happened over and over throughout history on the world stage. But it happens in our everyday lives too. And it does us no good to succumb to this kind of thinking. How do you resist the villain role? It's harder to resist assigning the villain role because a lot of the time it means acknowledging our own role in the situation, which might even mean admitting we made a mistake. And at this point, I could ask you to raise your hand if you've ever made a mistake, but that would be disingenuous. We've all screwed up. And like my dog, who cannot bear to look at the empty bag of cat food that she gorged herself on while I was out getting groceries, it can be hard to look at our mistakes and acknowledge our role in the adversity that we encounter. And likewise, every time something like this happens, I know that it's partially my own fault because I didn't lock up the bag. And clearly, I haven't finished teaching my dog how I want her to act. But am I advocating that we blame the victim in situations of shocking violence or unhinged behavior? No, absolutely not. I'm saying that it's important to know the difference and to humbly hold ourselves accountable when things go awry. So here I'm going to pause for a moment to give you a chance to catch up with everything that we've talked about so far. Do you see yourself getting caught up in any of these storytelling habits? You could nod your head or jot down a note or two if that's helpful to you. But here's a moment to pause. If you have a question or want clarification, feel free to chime in. Otherwise, I'm just going to breathe and have a sip of my water. And then we're going to move on.
So Jesse, is the victim villain model here? Are you taking this from Karpman's triangle of theory from the 60s? Have you heard of that one? The victim, villain, hero?
I haven't encountered that one. This one is coming from Crucial Conversation training, but it is pretty common. I was looking for examples of like how to apply it to everyday life. And I found a lot of mention of it kind of like smattered all over everybody's blogs. So it
Yeah,
certainly is, does not begin and end with where I found it.
yeah, it's a good one. So if people are more interested in, I'm sure you'll give them more source material, but that's a good one. Karpman's theory sometimes calls them rescuers instead of heroes, but victims, villains, and heroes. And so that's another angle to take this off of. That's probably where most of these places are deriving this victim, villain, hero model. And so look that up. It's a good one.
Nice.
Karpman is the name.
Karpman. Fishman. Got it.
Yeah, starts with a K. Karpman with a K.
All right. Okay. So if there's no other questions, I'm going to move forward. Next, I want to talk about what would Scary Spice do? Well, she'd tell you what she wants, what she really, really wants. And I hope that you end up with this song in your head today, because that's how I roll. So, but how do you know what you want, what you really, really want? Next, we're going to talk about outcome-based communication. And right off the hop, I'm going to tell you any conversation will benefit from knowing what it is you want to achieve. Before every meeting, every planned conversation, every encounter, if you take the time to specifically define what your goal is for that conversation, for the person you're speaking with, or for yourself, you're much more likely to end up near where you want to be. Even if you just write it on a sticky note to remind yourself to keep on track, things are much more likely to go according to plan. So next, I want to talk about what do I really want versus what am I acting like I want? And how would I act if I really wanted to get what I really want? When the stakes are high and we need to have a talk, it's really common that what we want and what we act like we want are two dramatically different things. I often ask people, do you want to be right? Or do you want to be happy? Because probably you can't be both. In a high stakes conversation, being right is often what we act like we want, but what will make us happy is usually very different. So take a second to think about a time when you tried to have a serious conversation with someone and it became a fight. What went wrong? Once the conversation began, did you get sidetracked by something shiny? Being right and feeling vindicated can look really shiny. But is that what you wanted? Ask yourself, is it important that so-and-so admits to being wrong in order for us to proceed? Or could we agree on something we both actually want? Chances are, regardless of the situation, personal, professional, romantic, creative, there are some shared outcomes that you can agree on that will change the tune of the conversation. So let's look at a scenario that has played out in every library I've ever worked. It's 10:30 at night. The alarm company has just called to notify you that the alarm has been going off at your library. You rush to the branch to investigate, and after reviewing the security footage, you see that a patron who had fallen asleep at one of the study carols has woken after hours and set off the alarm by going out the staff exit. You are livid. Your mind starts spinning, and each question is a jab, a finger ready to point at someone on your team. Who was closing tonight? Why didn't you do the closing sweeps? How could you have missed a whole human being? Do you realize what could have happened? And then the villain stories start to bubble up. That staff is so lazy. Nobody wants to work anymore. Staff need to be put on a performance improvement plan. We need to make some changes around here. Stop. Just stop. It's okay to be upset because a bad thing happened and it could have been worse. But this is the moment where you must resist the phenomena we know as lizard brain and come up with a better plan to get what you really want. don't let the lizard drive the bus. So now we're going to talk about overcoming lizard brain. Lizard brain is a stress response that we experience when adrenaline is pouring into our bodies and our instincts are screaming at us to fight or flee or freeze. Your lizard brain thinks it's going to help you survive a dangerous situation. But the truth is that if you let the lizard drive, there's a good chance it'll mow down your friends and coworkers. So here's how I resist the lizard. First, I acknowledge the lizard. Hey, lizard, nice of you to come. I am feeling very stressed right now. And then I take stock. Am I so upset that I'm going to explode? Well, then I find a safe way to explode. I have a journal where I write everything that I would never say out loud. All of the stories, all of the stress, all of my fear responses, they go into that journal. If someone read that journal, they would think I'm insane or maybe a monster. But this is how I ensure that the lizard doesn't get the keys to my car. You might not be a journalist like me, but maybe you have an impartial friend that would listen to you vent your concerns and your fears. Or maybe you have a mentor. The key thing is that you let the steam off away from the people that it might burn. Next, I ask myself some simple questions. What do I want? In this instance, I would want the building to be secure after hours. Who can help me achieve this goal? This is a shared goal. Well, my staff can help me achieve this goal. My cleaner could help me achieve this goal. My security guard could help me achieve this goal. Maybe others. Then I want to know, well, why did we fall down last night? I need to be authentically curious and open-minded and ask this question to my team. It's rare that there's a single point of failure, so we look at all the factors. And then, how do I support success? Are there resources we need more of? Are there clear expectations for who does what each day? Does my team know who to ask when they need assistance? And then finally, do I need to be in control of this challenge? Or is this something I can empower my team to resolve? And once I have some answers to this question, I can go after what I really want. So how do you get what you really, really want? Zoom out to the bigger picture. What do you really, really want? For the relationship, for the organization, for the community? I want a high functioning team with the combined strengths of personal accountability and safe communication. And if I let my lizard drive, there is no possibility that I'm going to get what I want. So you've dealt with last night's misadventure, but I urge you to give some thought to what you really, really want and to consider what that might look like if you tried to really get it. Believe it or not, this level of strategic thinking will improve every component of your life. It could be its own inspirational, aspirational session all on its own. But we don't have time to really dig into it today. I will say this. The first step to getting what you really want is knowing what you really want. Something we all can benefit from. How to be candid without being a jerk. So now we're going to talk about how you say what needs to be said and nobody needs to get hurt. And now we're going to talk about feelings. So everybody who was like, what about my feelings? Now we're going to talk about them. So here's a situation that isn't hard to imagine. A staff member's performance is suboptimal and they need to know about it. Nay, they deserve to know about it. But how do you deliver job-saving feedback without the fear of performing in, without the fear of hurting someone's feelings or compromising their sense of self? If you tell them that they're underperforming in one aspect of their role, will they assume that you're unhappy with them in all aspects? Where do you even begin? To be honest, giving feedback did not come naturally to me. I was raised on cliches like, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. And with the oldest daughter mentality of being resigned that I had to do everything. So in the past, if my direct report handed in something that wasn't good enough, I would just fix it myself. And that increased my workload and also my frustration with the staff member that I was refusing to provide feedback to. And this can become a vicious cycle in which both parties grow more and more frustrated. The relationship between supervisor and direct report is weakened by the lack of communication, and the supervisor will start to see their staff member as a problem, not an asset. In the end, getting rid of the employee might begin to seem like the best escape from what ultimately is your own failure. How awful. I've been on both sides of this situation, and I wouldn't wish it on anyone. In truth, providing timely, actionable, and candid feedback is one of the best ways to build trust with your team. If you do this right, your staff will know that you have their back and also their friend. Something I'm keenly aware of is that my team may not stay with me forever. I wish they would, but they're amazing. And someday each of them is going to grab a shooting star and off they'll go. But between now and then, it's my job to ensure that they develop all of the skills that they need to be successful wherever they end up. And when I provide timely, actionable, and candid feedback to them, there is no mistaking my motivation. I care about their success, and I'm rooting for them to have the career of their dreams. A book for your to be read pile, Radical Candor by Kim Scott. So how do you find the words to give meaningful feedback to the person that needs it? Conveniently, there is a visual aid for that. I keep my copy of Radical Candor on my desk, and I refer to it often. What you see before you is a grid that is based on two scales, challenge and care. If you're hitting the sweet spot, the communication you deliver demonstrates that you care personally about the receiver, and it also challenges the behavior of the receiver. To deliver the message directly, but without care, is to be obnoxiously aggressive. And to be honest, for some people, this works as well in a somewhat brutal trial by fire kind of atmosphere. But not everyone will be able to thrive in such an environment. And after they quit their job, they might look back on the experience of working with you and say they learned a lot. But the reality is that it won't jive with everyone. It's not my cup of tea, but it can get results. Ultimately, the most important thing that you do is that you challenge directly. But if you can also care personally too, that would be my recommendation. Now, if you skirt around the issue because you worry overly much about the fragile feelings of your staff member, you risk miring the both of you in the quicksand of ruinous empathy. It is really hard to get out of this sludge once you fall into it. The truth is that this is the danger zone where good working relationships become toxic. The longer you remain silent, the greater frustration will grow until soon that staff member won't even be able to breathe right in your presence. And they will be baffled because they won't know what they did wrong. Cue updating the resume and beginning the job search. If you manage to fall into the final quadrant, manipulative insincerity, you are pulling punches and avoiding directly challenging your team. Why would you do this? Typically, this happens because you want to be liked, or because providing meaningful guidance would be too much work, and insincere approval kicks the issue down the road a bit. And while you might not realize you're doing it, this is the quadrant in which you give your team just enough rope to hang themselves. When you take the easy road, your team suffers. And I've been there, and I don't recommend it. I'm going to pause again to give you a moment to consider your feedback style. Do you think you fall into one of these quadrants more frequently than others? No one lives in radical candor all day, every day. But with practice, you can improve your ability to hit it more often than not. So if you have any questions or want clarification, this is your chance to get it. Or you can just make yourself a note and follow up with me later. And that's totally fine too.
I'm watching the chat too.
Hearing none, I will
Yeah.
proceed. Okay, clear is kind. Brené Brown said this, and although I'm not actually pulling from her body of work in any other way, this is the statement that is just right for what I want to tell you next. I've spent the last few minutes explaining the why and the what behind candid communication, and now we need to talk a bit about the how. When I'm preparing to deliver feedback, I run through a simple exercise. You might remember these questions from primary English language arts class. So, who am I talking to, and what do I know about them? I'm going to tailor my communication style based on this information. What do I know about the situation, and what don't I know? It's important to be authentically curious. What are my intentions for this person? What is the outcome that I want for them? What is the specific minimum viable outcome that I want from this conversation? And why is it important? What would be the outcome of not addressing this issue? My advice is to make notes for yourself. State the most important information in the simplest and clearest terms possible and go from there. So, how do you practice what I preach? Well, this is how I practice what I preach. So, it starts with regular check-ins. If you're meeting with your team and coworkers regularly, feedback becomes a routine part of the relationship. Adversely, if the only time that you make space in your calendar to meet with your team is when you have something negative to say, soon a calendar invite is going to strike fear into their hearts. So don't do it like that. Next, prepare in advance. I feel like I've mentioned this. If you have something important to say, take the time to plan it out and put yourself in the right frame of mind to be supportive and not obnoxious. And then finally, if you can, make it mutual. Give your team an opportunity or many opportunities to provide you with feedback. If you make a habit of asking specific questions about your habits, your communication, your ideas, your leadership style, more and more the trust will grow. And soon you'll find that what your team has achieved is truly remarkable. A culture of accountability and safe communication comes from authentic practices and mutual willingness to risk misunderstanding in pursuit of shared meaning. So we have reached our fourth topic. I'm going to pause for another moment, just in case. Oh, Stuart has something.
What do you define as regular for check-ins?
Well, I think that would depend on the full-time equivalent of your staff and your own capacity, and also their level of responsibility. So for my consultants who have a high level of responsibility and also work full-time, I meet with them once a week. For another staff member who works full-time, but their job has less variety in responsibility, I meet with them at least once every 4 weeks. And then, of course, they can meet with me sooner if they need to. But we have a regular set schedule so that they know that we're going to chat about whatever's going on. And sometimes it's just a catch up, right? It's not always corrective or, fraught with constructive feedback. But it just depends on the need in the relationship. With my consultants, there's always something exciting going on that they might want me to weigh in on, and they have a lot of active projects that I want updates on. So meeting weekly for them for half an hour or an hour if they need it is really reasonable, just to keep us in the loop. It also helps that we all work remotely, so we don't bump into each other in the hallways. We have to take this time intentionally. But what I just said about bumping into each other in the hallways, that does not replace a formal one-on-one, because you're not going to spring feedback on somebody in the hallway, I hope. And so you do want to formalize it in a way that fits the environment that you all work in. Does that help? Make sense?
Like we got the thumbs up.
I saw it.
Do you have any advice, Jesse, on how you mentioned like journaling? I really love that.
I know
And
you
I
do.
know, and you talked about venting, finding that person to vent to. How do we ensure, like, I don't know, like, how do we stop the venting from becoming like devolving into just negative reinforcement and, toxic analysis? Like one of the things that we do, I read recently was just about pathways in the brain. And when we focus on the negative, we're just making it easier for us to get down that negative path every time, So are there things that we can do that, we need that outlet that would help in terms of, I don't know.
Well, I think that if you're going to go the route of venting, it's important to make it clear in your venting relationship what your intended outcome is. And the person who is listening to you vent, you might agree that it's their responsibility to end the venting session with a couple questions. And then how you know when venting is over, when you start to feel curious about the situation, that's kind of when you know you've turned the corner in your feelings. And then you're ready to start properly addressing the situation. But there's no like time frame. Like I've taken more than a week to plan a conversation that was important to me, because the first several times that I began to write my notes, they were unhinged. And it's okay to like have an emotional response when, we put a lot of ourselves into work, but it's not okay to like dump your emotional response on, on your staff person, when ultimately being able to define your shared goals and kind of refocus on the outcome will get you a lot farther.
Right.
So
I
would
like
say,
what you said there too about like knowing like it sounds like the goal is that you sort of head towards curiosity and you're changing your so if your venting goal isn't driving you towards changing your emotions and more curiosity, then you're probably not venting, you're just being negative.
yeah. And having somebody, the point of venting to someone you trust is that they would tell you that, like, buddy, you're spinning your wheels now. We've been over this.
Yeah.
But if you're in a situation where you're spinning your wheels and digging deeper and deeper into your frustration, it's possible. And I'm, not there in your head, and I don't know what situation you're imagining. I hope it has nothing to do with me. But totally. It's Tim. But hopefully you might realize at that point, I have delayed giving this person feedback and I'm more frustrated with them than this situation warrants. And that's another distinct possibility, especially when you are in the mud of ruinous empathy. Joanne?
This is along the same lines. My past job, they adopted this way of getting feedback, and it was, we were asked 3 questions. And even if you went to tell your manager something that was negative, you know, I didn't like this, she would ask the other 2 questions. And so it was, what went wrong? What went well? What could have been improved? Okay. What went well? What went wrong? What could you do to improve it? Or what could we do to improve it? And so you could absolutely hate the way something went at this job, but you knew those other 2 questions would come up to, well, what went well? What do you think went well? And you weren't really allowed, it's not that you weren't allowed to say, well, nothing. It's just going to your manager to say nothing went well was kind of, you know, as an employee, that's not the way to go to your manager. And what could you do to improve it? Well, you know, you could say what went wrong, but like, come on, if you know something went wrong, you probably have an idea what could have been done to improve it. So we were asked those 3 questions anytime we had feedback, and every performance appraisal meeting, we were asked those questions for things like events we were involved in, or yeah, those always came up.
I like that. Thank you. I might circle back to that when I am preparing, I guess, a knowledge base article to find the link to this this talk. Okay.
There we go. I can't
Well,
lower my hand.
maybe it'll just lower on its own.
Cut this out later.
No worries.
Go.
I'm getting really good at editing out my own outbursts.
Ah.
Working on that objectively. Okay, consequences. How to communicate through conflict. So up until now, we've been talking about feedback, really. And feedback always kind of comes with like a little spark. But now we're going to go a little bit further down that road, and we're going to talk about conflict and confrontation. So before you charge forth to engage in conflict, and I hope by now you realize that I actually don't recommend you charge forth ever. But something you need to do is perform CPR on your version of events. So that is content, pattern, relationship. So take a look at whatever's going on and define for yourself the content, also known as the facts. No stories here. What happened? You want to clarify what happened and also what didn't happen, just to ensure that the facts are clear in your mind. And when I say what didn't happen, I'm coaching you to intentionally separate your feelings about what happened from the facts. So if someone was disrespecting you, that's not a fact. That's your story to go along with what actually happened. Does that make sense? So you intentionally separate your feelings about what happened from the facts, and you look at what happened and how it felt, being 2 separate components of this equation. And sometimes, because sometimes our emotions are unreliable narrators. Next, you consider the pattern. Is there a pattern? Has this happened before? Is this incident part of a pattern of behavior, or is it an isolated incident? For this incident, if this incident is a part of a pattern, it can change the way that you interpret it and the way that you address it. But beware of a common false equivalence. They say it's unfair to dredge up the past and pile on past crimes when you are confronting someone about an issue between you. But when the current behavior is part of a specific pattern that is harming your relationship, then that's not the same thing. And you absolutely should address a pattern of behavior. But to address interrupting in meetings and being late and stealing my lunch, those are all different incidents. They suck, but they're all different. So you don't address all of those in one conversation. I hope that makes sense. And then finally, you consider the relationship. How does this behavior or this issue affect your relationship? And this is where your feelings come back in. What aspects of the relationship do you feel are being impacted by the situation? Do you feel misunderstood, misinformed, unengaged? Is your trust affected? Does this person start to seem unreliable to you or untrustworthy? Now is the time to dig into your feelings and get specific about them. For some, this will be the hardest part. And for others, it will be a challenge to not let your feelings run the whole conversation. Either way, you've got to find a middle ground. Once you've clarified the situation and you've taken care of any lizard brain that might be affecting you in the heat of the moment, you begin to develop your plan for addressing the conflict. And please rest assured that unless you are a communication unicorn, if you fail to plan, you will absolutely plan to fail. Next, confrontation. What to say and how to speak the words. And I just want to clarify that confrontation doesn't have to include smashing china or yelling or anything explosive and negative. Confrontation is really just referring to addressing something head on and not circling around it. So when I say confrontation, I am not suggesting that you drop the gloves and go for the throat. So what to say and how to speak the words. So we're going to start with the what you should say. So this part is all about facts, stories, and outcomes. 3 things we have already discussed, but here's how you pull it together. So Clarence, can I talk to you for a minute? I don't feel right about what happened in the meeting yesterday, and I would like to discuss it with you. Simple. Does the thought of starting a conversation about conflict make your heart pound? You wouldn't be alone if it did. I think one of the hardest parts about is finding the words to begin. My advice is always to keep it simple, stick to the bare facts. And yeah, it is a fact that you don't feel right. So here is what my conversation partner knows after I've said these 2 sentences. I want to talk to him about a recent meeting. I'm experiencing feelings about what happened, and he may or may not know what I'm referring to, and I want to discuss it with him. So we agree on a time to meet, but how will I know what to say? I have a simple guide to take you through your side of the conversation, but don't forget everything we've talked about this. Your intentions, your goals for the conversation, and your mental state are going to play a huge role in how it goes. So you start with your facts. Yesterday in the meeting, you interrupted me when I was talking over and over again. I started counting after the 2nd time, and then I lost track after the 8th. Then you share your story. How did you interpret that behavior? And then you invite them to share their version. So to me, it felt like you didn't really care for my ideas. Do you recall what I'm talking about? Can you tell me about your experience in that meeting? So I've said what that felt like. I've said how that story was born in my mind. And then I've asked them to clarify what was going on with them. Now, finally, you have to define the path forward. So you will have come to this conversation with a minimum viable outcome that you can live with. So at minimum, you're aiming for that. And that doesn't have to be a secret. So you define the path forward, and hopefully after sharing both of your stories, you will feel better, you will have a better understanding of what happened and why. So together, what can you agree upon? When you define the path forward, you're envisioning what you hope to achieve together. This is a combination of both the outcome that you wish to achieve and also an awareness of the impact on your relationship if you can't come to an agreement together. I would like it if you would resist the urge to interrupt me. It makes me feel like my words and ideas are worthless. And when it happens, it gets harder and harder to speak up in the group. Can we come up with a plan to overcome this together? So then you define a limited number of shared outcomes that you agree upon. So outcome number 1, everyone gets to speak at a meeting. Action. Clarence and I will collaborate on a proposal of new meeting procedures for our team. And this will support the transfer of the mic, and it will give everyone a chance to speak in turn. Outcome number 2, Clarence will stop interrupting others in his haste to share his thoughts. The action, Clarence will practice self-control during meetings to ensure he doesn't interrupt his coworkers when they're talking. He will employ fidget tools and note-taking to manage his impulses. Action number 2, Clarence and I will debrief after meetings to address how things are going and to affirm our support of equitable meeting environments. So that is a very simple version of what that can look like. And it also predicates that both parties come with a shared desire to get along and to have a healthy work environment. Will this work if you are working with someone who is irate? Not necessarily. It might take multiple attempts at the same conversation to get to your final destination, but it's still worth working at. And it's definitely worth asking for help if attempt number 1 and maybe number 2 fail you. Okay. Next, beware of landmines. In all honesty, whether you believe their version of events or think it was a load of hogwash is not important here. What really matters is that together you change the future. 2 people in conflict are on an inevitable collision course unless they can reset their trajectories through shared understanding of the way forward. That collision might be years in the future, or it might explode at the next encounter. But unresolved conflict is essentially a landmine in your own backyard. And I'm new to gardening, but that doesn't sound like something I want to plant in my yard. So I'm going to tell you about a time when I didn't plant a landmine in my own yard. I was a wee baby librarian working at Edmonton Public Library. I had a co-worker who had a habit of looking at my body and hugging me without permission and laying hands on me at every given opportunity. He was older than me and he had a permanent contract, whereas I was just temporary staff. Most people who know me know that I don't like to be touched without permission, and I'm not a casual hugger. And I frequently find smooth ways to let others know that that's my preference. So Billy Bob, not his real name, was causing me a lot of distress. And I finally couldn't tolerate it anymore. I planned out my conversation with him and I approached my manager with a plan. I wanted her buy-in for handling it myself. And after hearing my plan, she 100% supported my decision to deal with the situation on my own. Next, I waited until old Bilbo and I were on shift together, and I asked if I could speak to him for a moment. Of course, he said as his eyes raked my body. I stepped into the empty program room to give us some privacy, and then I turned to him and I said, I've noticed that you are very physically affectionate with other people, including myself. And when we talk, you often glance down at my body in a way that makes me uncomfortable. I wanted to tell you that I'm not comfortable with being touched by others, and I would prefer it if you ceased these behaviors in my regard. Pretty good, right? I was a baby. Bibbly Boy was effusive in his response. He assured me that he completely understood. And it's just that he is Italian, and they are incredibly affectionate people, and he doesn't mean anything by it. But if it happens again, it's just not intentional. It's just how he was raised. So this is what I mean when I say that sometimes their story doesn't really matter because the outcome should be the same, even if the path forward might look different than you envisioned. And this is where I did not plant a landmine in my own yard by accepting his version of events as an excuse for bad behavior. I said, no, Biffy Bop, if it happens again, I will let HR know about the problem and I will let them handle it. Too long, didn't listen. Boundaries are good. So now we move on to the how of engaging in conflict resolution, confrontations. Okay, so there's two things. I want you to learn to talk tentatively, and I want you to practice testing theories. Talking tentatively means avoiding using absolutes and intentionally leaving room for others to share their perspectives. Instead of saying, you interrupt me because you don't respect me. Try, when you interrupt, I feel disrespected. You're not assuming that their intention is to disrespect you, but you are addressing the impact on you. And when you're speaking tentatively, you don't want to come in too soft and undermine your own narrative, but you also don't want to jump into attack mode, which will put your partner on the defense. I will return to our imaginary interrupter case study to illustrate the Goldilocks test for communication. So, too cold. Maybe I'm just being oversensitive. This is probably stupid, but it seems like you've talked over me a lot in our meetings lately. Am I doing something wrong? And then there's too hot. Your Highness, has it ever occurred to you that your ideas aren't the only ones that matter? What's wrong with you? Spicy. And just right. It seemed like you weren't really interested in my ideas because you kept interrupting me. Can you tell me what was going on? So next, I want you to practice testing theories. Sometimes in these conversations, you need to prime the pump in order to help your partner speak their experience. So if your conversation partner is struggling for words, you can help them out by tentatively proposing counter theories to what came to your mind. And this will help them to speak their truth. So I noticed that you jump in really quickly with your ideas. Is it that you're afraid you'll lose your train of thought if you don't get it out in the open as quickly as possible? And then they can say, yeah, that's it. Or no, actually, I have untreated ADHD and I struggle with that everywhere and I'm going to work on it. You know, they can say whatever. But it opens the opportunity for them to agree or contradict or just participate in some way in that conversation. And that, my friends, brings us to the end. Like I said, no one is a perfect communicator all the time. Sometimes, even when you've taken the time to plan everything out and you're sure you're in the right frame of mind, we can still muck up a conversation and need to try again. But with every mistake, we must surely be learning. And I can almost guarantee you that if a conversation goes awry and you have the nerve to return to it and say, that didn't go the way I hoped, and I'm sorry for it. Can we try again? The trust that grows from those experiences can be truly incredible. As I said, I've been a student in the art of communication for quite some time, and this talk has been informed by my three favorite pieces of education. So there's Crucial Conversations, which is training, but it's also a book. There's Radical Cander, which I really liked as an audiobook because I was able to listen to it like a lecture, much like this. And Kim Scott goes much, much deeper into the details of how to be a kick-ass leader, which is, of course, the goal. And then the last one is what I refer to as all-around know-it-all, Simon Sinek. He has a great number of really inspirational and quite frankly actionable videos that are all over YouTube. He does TED Talks. He's all over the place. He has a podcast. He's on other people's podcasts. He's really quite a clever guy. And I'd never listened to a video of his and thought that wouldn't work. So those are my 3 favorite sources of information. If there was a particular aspect of this talk that you would like more information on, I would be happy to hear from you and will gladly connect you with the resources that informed my words. But you'll notice I didn't actually quote very much from these sources. And the reason for that is that everything I shared was all blended up together from years of kind of using it. So I can tell you where I got it, but the truth is that this is most certainly, in many cases, my version of it, which is certainly not true to the source material, or it's at least, a little spin. So just grain of salt. This is informed by this, but it's, my interpretation and how I use it. So the way I communicate might not be perfect for everyone, but I think that these foundations are really good. And so I was really happy to share them with you today. And that brings us to a final opportunity to ask questions. As I said, if you have any questions or want clarification, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And as always, if you have any complaints, please direct them to Tim.